$4.1 billion Affordable Homes Act is the largest housing bill the state of Massachusetts has ever seen.
Western Mass News reporter Reagan Stoddard joins us live in studio to tell us what a local group in Springfield is calling on the state legislator for.
Chris and Abby, the Pioneer Valley Project clergy leaders, hosted a Love Your Neighbor press conference to urge the State House and Senate to pass an affordable housing bill. The press conference took place at South Congregational Church. Reverend Lindsay Peterson, pastor of the South Congregational Church, Reverend David Lewis, president of the PVP, and Rabbi Jeremy Master, rabbi of the Sinai Temple, all spoke at today's event.
As clergy, every day we hear heartbreaking stories of families forced to make the impossible choice between food and shelter because of the skyrocketing cost of housing in Massachusetts and the severe housing shortage in our state.
According to the Pioneer Valley Project, Massachusetts is the third most expensive state to live in. 2/3 of low-income renters spend half their rent on housing, and to pay 30% of income on rent, residents need to earn $36 an hour. The PVP, along with other faith-based organizations across the state, will continue to push for a robust version of Governor Healey's Affordable Housing Act. Specifically, they're calling on legislators to protect the local option for a real estate transfer fee. That would provide much-needed funding in the bill. This bill could help preserve and improve up to 65,000 homes in Massachusetts. Reporting live in studio, Reagan Stoddard, Western Mass News.